everything else, it's impossible to get ahead. I work from the morning until late, more than 10 hours. And for what? To pay the bills?
So let's get back to Melanie De Bono, a senior Europe economist at Pantheon Macroeconomics. So, Melanie, concern growing over a return to the Eurozone crisis that broke out in 2010. What are the chances? So, Melanie, concern growing over a return to the Eurozone crisis that broke out in 2010.
Government bond yields were rising quickly, and especially because now debt servicing costs will rise, and the no longer favoring hiking of interest rates, government bond yields were rising quickly, and especially because now debt servicing costs will rise, and the no longer favoring higher interest rates, government bond yields were rising.
Say hello to Westland, the world's most powerful all-in-one design platform. The flexibility of HTML. Say yes to Western JavaScript, the world's most powerful all-in-one design platform. Craft precise websites and flexibility of HTML. Say yes to Western JavaScript, the world's most powerful.
So it's spending a lot more, it's having to issue new debt, and therefore debt servicing costs will rise and the debt burden will rise. Do we think it's going to lead to a new debt crisis? No, we don't. And therefore, the debt is more manageable now, and we think that the relationship between government bond yields and nominal debt is much more benign than it was in 2012.
Semantic code for you.
If we were heading in that direction, the ECB would be much more willing to come to risk now compared to the intransigence of 2012.
All right. So do you think that the TPI will work if indeed it is even used? Do you think it's going to be used? And is it just me, or have the details been left deliberately vague?
It's not just you. Yes, so the ECB President Christine Lagarde said that they will not tell us everything about the TPI. We do have some information, and that's basically that the TPI is like a form of asset purchase program, but of course not exactly like QE. So it's, in simple terms, a promise by the ECB that it will buy certain governments' bonds if it thinks that bond yields are rising much more quickly than the fundamentals would imply. There's a number of conditions on this, such as fiscal sustainability, and it really just depends how strictly the ECB enforces those conditions, whether or not it will be helpful for countries like Italy or not. It's very easy to see some of the governing council members putting up headline signals that they don't want to support some countries because of past fiscal sustainability worries. So who knows if it will help, and who knows if it will be used.
Okay, Christine Lagarde declined to say whether Italy is actually on the list, given the political crisis. Could Italy even meet TPI's conditions? I'm guessing from what you were saying earlier that it possibly could. And what does all of this mean for investors?
So at this point, Italy probably does meet the conditions, yes. But of course, we're heading for snap elections. So as we do head for snap elections, we expect Italian bond yields to rise, and that's based on political uncertainty. And that's one of the things that the TPI conditions set out. If the bond yields are rising and spreads are widening because of political, self-inflicted political uncertainty, then it wouldn't warrant the use of TPI. So we'll have to wait and see whether or not, at this point, what happens in the coming months will lead the ECB to step in.
So what's next for Italy's economy, Melanie, after Draghi's exit? Why is it in such a mess? And is it at risk, do you think, of even crashing out of the Eurozone?
We do not see a risk that Italy will crash out of the Eurozone. None of the political parties are offering that up. They've learned from the mistakes of before. They would like to stay in the Euro, even the most right-wing parties. And so we do not see a risk of that. As it happens, Mario Draghi did resign, and we are heading for snap elections. Does that change the outlook for Italy? We don't think so. So for us, further fiscal support was an upside risk to our forecast. The snap election means that further fiscal support this year is highly unlikely. And that's not because of willpower, but it's more because of logistics. The snap election is being held on the 25th of September. Coalition politics mean that in Italy, it will take time for a governing coalition to form, let alone that new government agreeing on new fiscal aid. So because fiscal support was an upside to our forecast before, now it's no longer there. And we still expect the Italian economy to enter recession by Q4 this year. Our forecasts currently point to growth of 2.7% for this year as a whole, which is lower than what the government has recently forecast.
Really good to talk to you, Melanie. Many thanks indeed for being with us on Counting the Cost.
Of course. Thank you for including me.
Now, it was seen as an act of solidarity in the face of what EU countries say is energy blackmail by Russia. The bloc's watered-down plan to cut gas consumption by 15% comes as Moscow announced another cut to supply, sending prices up once again. Russian energy firm Gazprom says that it's reduced gas flows into Germany to allow work on a turbine on the Nord Stream 1 pipeline. But EU leaders say that move is politically motivated. Al Jazeera's Barbara Angopa reports.
The energy crisis looming over Europe dominated the meeting of EU ministers in Brussels. Cutting gas consumption ahead of winter, the best and only way to reduce EU's reliance on Russian energy.
45 BCM corresponds to a 15% cut in our usual gas consumption between the beginning of August and the end of March. That's why we have pointed to this percentage as the target all member states should strive forward.
Russia is set to further reduce supplies to the Nord Stream pipelines, blaming a technical fault at one of their stations, something EU ministers dispute. EU leaders say there's no technical reason for the latest reduction.
As of today, there is no solution to the ongoing equipment issues at the Portiavea compressor station. There is no solution whatsoever yet. Siemens is saying nothing. They're trying to find solutions, but there are none.
As the West and Russia exchange economic blows in response to Russia's war in Ukraine, European leaders say Moscow is not a trustworthy partner.
The winter is coming, and we don't know how cold it will be, but what we know for sure that Putin will continue to play his dirty games in misusing and blackmailing by gas supplies.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says Europe is already at war with Russia, and gas is the new front line.
All this is done by Russia on purpose to make it as difficult as possible for Europeans to prepare for winter. And this is an open gas war that Russia is waging against a united Europe. This is precisely how it should be perceived. And they don't care what will happen to the people or how they will suffer, from hunger due to the blockading of ports, or from winter cold and poverty, or from occupation. These are just different forms of terror.
Nearly half of all the gas Europe needs comes from Russia. The supply is now down to a relative trickle. Come winter, if European countries don't have enough supplies stored up in time, rations will almost certainly mean a struggle to heat homes and power cities. Barbara Angopa, Al Jazeera.
Well, the voluntary agreement may become mandatory if supplies reach crisis levels. However, some countries not connected to the EU's gas pipelines, such as Ireland, Malta and Cyprus, would be exempt. States like Baltic nations that are heavily reliant on gas for electricity can also avoid the reductions. And it's the same for any country that fills its gas storage tanks to the required 80% level, as well as critical industries and supply chains that use gas as a feedstock. Now, an EU official said that Hungary was the only member state that opposed the gas reduction agreement. Let's discuss all of this further with Michael Bradshaw, Professor of Global Energy at Warwick Business School. He joins us now from Coventry in the UK. Michael, good to have you with us once again. What do you make of this deal? How are businesses, factories, households going to be affected?
And as you've suggested, it's a compromise. I mean, a bargain has been struck. There's lots of exemptions, and we must wait and see what happens if we get to a physical shortage of supply. If you look at the kind of measures that are proposed, I think for households, it really means that they are hoping on what we might call behavioural change, that people will take measures to reduce their gas consumption in the winter. I mean, these things are not necessarily hard to do, turning down thermostats, improving the efficiency of your house in terms of insulation, windows, not heating rooms you don't need and so forth. For industry, it's much harder, particularly the energy-intensive industries. There's already a degree of demand destruction as a consequence of high price. But most countries will probably have in place a system that will actually say to key industries, you need to reduce or stop operating to save gas, so that gas can be used to generate electricity and heat households.
It's being described as a show of resolve, a show of solidarity among EU nations, but are they really united in the energy war with Russia?
Well, obviously what President Putin hopes to do is drive discord and disunity among European member states. The fact that they've reached agreement is a positive, but as your reporters have suggested, it comes with various caveats and exemptions. The other concern among member states is what one might call commission creep, that actually the European Commission is overstepping its mandate here, because responsibility for energy security and an energy mix is actually something that lies with national governments, not the European Union. I think it really will be tested if we get to this emergency situation where they try to make it mandatory. Until then, it's a voluntary agreement and we must wait and see.
All right, given the long list of exemptions, could European nations still fill the gaps left if Russia does turn off the taps completely, especially if Europe faces an exceptionally cold winter?
I think the short answer is no. There's simply not enough gas available in global markets, because most of the other gas will have to come as liquefied natural gas. And it's not just whether or not there's a mild winter in Europe. We've been relatively lucky in Europe that the Chinese demand has been depressed as a consequence of COVID. If we have a hard winter in the Northern Hemisphere that affects Asian LNG demand, we'll be in competition with Asia to try and secure the available flexible LNG. There's simply not enough flexible LNG to cover the gap.
So where does all of this leave the EU's plans to ultimately wean itself off Russian gas?
Well, it's going to take time. There's no question about that. I mean, the backstory here is that the global gas market is exceedingly tight, and the European Union is wanting to pivot away from pipeline gas to relying on seaborne liquefied natural gas. And the market there is going to be tight probably for the next